Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. It is our second week on the Inception Radio Network, so if you want to listen to the show live, do come to InceptionRadioNetwork.com or click through the Listen Live button on the Just Energy Radio webpage. So I have a few announcements before I bring our guests on air, David Rountree and Thomas Fusco. First, our new book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, is out. It is released. It is available. If you want to get a signed copy of this book, please go to our webpage that we made for it, manmadethechronicles.com. We're offering free shipping for all books that you purchase through our website, and they will all come autographed by myself and my co-author, Wayne LaLiberty, which I think is totally priceless. Now, obviously, you can get it through Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, but they don't come signed, so not nearly as good. So I just got back from the Paradigm Symposium, and if you've been listening to the show, I've been talking about this event for months. Just to let you know, I got to hang out with Giorgio Zuccalos, the guy with the hair. He's even cooler than his hair. I just wanted you all to know that, in case you were wondering. Philip Coppens got to sit and talk with Eric von Däniken, which was very cool, and George Norrie, which, speaking of George Norrie, I was invited to be a guest on Coast to Coast AM. I'm going to be on the show Monday evening, so if you want to find out more about Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, please do tune in to Coast to Coast AM at whatever time it is in your location. And don't forget, all of the Just Energy Radio shows are available through the Just Energy Radio website. The new ones on Inception Radio Network obviously will be on this site, and they are also available on our YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today, because it is going to be fun. It is, that Halloween time, and so, of course, we have to do a ghost, spooky kind of show. Although we are bringing science into spirit and ghosts. Our title today is Einstein, Ghosts, and Scientific Theory. To share their information, we have David Rountree and Thomas Fusco. So let me tell you a little bit about each of them. David Rountree began his research into the paranormal professionally in 1976 and investigated cases scientifically from Rhode Island to Key West, Florida.
Dave Rountree, and I started out back in 1976 after I'd had a series of personal experiences growing up. I started looking at the scientific possibilities behind what was creating or contributing to paranormal or perceived paranormal activity. I made a couple of interesting discoveries along the way about EVP, eliminating it as being sound, and confirming later in the early 2000s that it was indeed created by emerging EMF in the audio spectrum. Since then, I've made a couple of other discoveries, and we're going to talk about some of those today. And take it away, Tom.
Okay, David. I'm an independent researcher. I think like many other people that have been drawn into these kinds of fields, I, too, had personal experiences early in my life. But for me, certainly what I found was that I was compelled by the question, what kind of a universe would allow these types of things to occur? How could the universe be put together that would encompass these things? And so for me, the journey was to find a model of reality, a new vision of reality that would not only describe these kinds of paranormal or supernatural events and the mechanisms behind them, but also to answer some of the compelling questions that face mainstream science even today. And so I spent nearly 30 years putting this model together, and that is the culmination of which is my book, Behind the Cosmic Veil. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
We are. But let's start real easy. In your opinion, what are ghosts?
Rick, Tom.
Who's that to? Is that to David or myself?
Well, both of you. So since you're talking, Tom, why don't you go ahead and start?
I'll go first. Okay. To me, all of this relates to what I call the primary paradigm of the universe. I'm of an opinion that as far as cracking the secrets of creation, that it isn't that we don't have enough information to get a good idea of what's going on, nor is it that we're not smart enough to figure it out. The challenge has been that we haven't had a proper paradigm, a proper way of looking at things that would reveal the underlying mechanisms behind many of these anomalous observations that we have. And so ultimately, for me, that primary paradigm is to define the universe as an expression of materialized and materializing information. To me, that is the core fundamental concept that defines the universe. Everything else is basically detail, an expression of all the different forms that information takes, and all of the environmental or physical conditions that are observed in which that information materializes. And so consequently, when we're talking about a ghost, an apparition, however you might want to put that, to me what we're dealing with is a collection of coherent information, which everything that we see in the universe is assembled from, in the process of materializing into local space-time. Now, can that information include an intelligence? Absolutely. Our intelligence, in our own brains, could be described as a collection of information that's materialized in a particular way. So for me, a manifestation of a ghost is a materialization of information that is coming from elsewhere and materializing locally in front of us.
Okay, Dave, your turn.
Ghost is such a broad-based terminology based pretty much on folklore. And the reality is that it is applied to a lot of different environmental changes that occur and perceptions that are occurring by the human experience. To me, if we want to define that as an apparition, and that's what we're referring to, then I believe an apparition is a projected holographic image that is displayed on what I call a paranormal event horizon. And this paranormal event horizon is pretty much a very localized area where the laws of physics seem to bend or modify in a very localized area. And within that area is where the paranormal effects occur. I believe it's a projection and not necessarily matter, other than it being perhaps light particles or that sort of thing that's being manifested. Because it seems like that people can move through it. It can move through people. So I don't believe it has any real tangible mass. But on the other hand, do I think that there's an intelligence behind it? I do. I think that the consciousness is something that goes on forever. I think it's based off of all of the energy that's coursing through our body. And we know from the first law of thermodynamics that energy can be neither created nor destroyed. So I believe it continues to go on. And there's certainly a great deal of anecdotal evidence supporting that notion. But I believe that pretty much the same as Tom does, that we're dealing with an emerging manifestation in which information is coming into our environment from another point outside of our environment.
In the very general sense of the word, because we're going to get into this obviously deeper, but many people believe that ghosts are basically figments of the observer's imagination. And you both are men of science. And based on your work, it sounds like you're saying that there is something real, something measurable, and I'm going to use this word even though you might disagree with me, David, something tangible going on.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quantifiable. I mean, not only is it quantifiable, it's predictable. The data that we are getting is predictable based on a series of conditions that occur locally in the environment. That's kind of the beauty of Tom's theory in reference to my research. Tom's theory develops predictions, and my research has verified that those predictions are true. So for the first time, we actually have a tangible working theory that not only makes predictions, but then, establishes and proves those predictions through the actual research to back it up. And it's a milestone. It's a huge breakthrough, I believe.
Well, Tom, since it's been brought up, what is your theory? What's the basis that we're kind of talking about here?
Well, in its simplest terms, it begins with this paradigm of looking at the universe as an expression of materialized and materializing information. The idea that matter and energy and these forms and structures that it takes are assembled from a collection of information is mainstream in physics today. So much so that physics has added an extension to the old conservation laws that we all learned in school that said that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Modern physics has an extension to that says that the information from which matter and energy is assembled, that too can neither be created nor destroyed. The difference with my work is that I identify that particular way of looking at the universe as the fundamental way to look at the universe, that it is actually, if we were to take a look at like the Great Pyramid of Giza and every one of the blocks in it, give us a different perspective. Standing there and looking upon the rest of the structure gives us a different perspective on how to view and measure reality. To me, the idea of information is the capstone. It is the pinnacle of that entire pyramid. Now, when we accept that or we begin to look at it from that point of view, it demands or leads to two follow-up questions. And the first of those is, where does that information come from? And the second of those is, how can that information materialize into physical reality? And so the crux of my theory provides, number one, for a source of information, a super-physical, above physical, what I call a super-geometric overlay on top of physical reality. In other words, what I say is, it's a very old idea, is that the physical universe is not all of what reality is. The physical universe is a part of reality. It is the physical part of reality. There is a superphysical part of reality also that combines with the universe to make up the entire realm of reality. The idea that there is a body or a collection of information, a database, a cosmic consciousness, a universal mind. Paul Davies calls it the mind of God. It's a very old idea. It dates back to Plato's Forms. The Bible talks about it. It describes it as the Word of God or the wisdom of God. In the 20th century, we have, we have one of the most prominent physicists in the 20th century, David Bohm, proposing the idea of implicate order. And that implicate order is not physical, and yet gives rise to the explicate order of physical space, time, matter, and energy. We have David Finkelstein, another prominent theoretical physicist, that talks about coherent superpositions. And then, of course, we have John Wheeler, another very well-known physicist, who talks about the idea of pre-geometry, which my idea of supergeometry is basically a further development of that concept. And none of these physicists are, fringe people. These are all nut-and-bolt mainstream physicists, highly respected and widely recognized for their knowledge and their ability. The other part of the theory has to do with how that information materializes. And this is the mechanism that has escaped all these theorists before. And I just kind of put two to two together, looked at all the observable evidence that we had, including and especially paranormal phenomena, and came to the understanding that it is not matter which bends the space around it. This is something that Einstein proposed, and it's been proved consistently, that space is bent. It twists and bends around all physical objects. And so the conventional view has been the idea that matter is what bends the space around it. Mine is almost a super literal interpretation of Einsteinian's continuous spatial field, his continuum. And according to that, according to my model, it is within the bends of space that matter materializes. In other words, everything looks the same as it would in both paradigms, but the difference is that the bending of space is the cause of gravity and materialized information, rather than materialized information causing gravity in the curves of space. Now, to take this a step further with what David was talking about experimentally, when we look at the universe around us, as I mentioned before, most all of the objects that we see are very stable. This idea of information being materialized in the physical reality is already fully emerged in almost everything we see. To me, the two major areas of evidence, of observations, where we actually get to see information materializing in real time, is in the world of quantum mechanics and in paranormal phenomena. So the next step of that is this. If my model is true, then we could go to a body of evidence that we see information materializing in front of us, like paranormal phenomena, and say, okay, if information materializes within the bends of space, that means that space must be bending and swelling and forming, let's say, like a bubble. In order for information to fall into it, like in a paranormal event, haunted house, where we would observe such materializations like disembodied voices, like apparitions, like EVPs, this kind of thing. Which means that this model is true, then space must be bending locally before this information comes into our local environment and materializes. That gives us a whole slew of experimental possibilities, because if space would be artificially bent in the presence of what Einstein called physical content, which would be atoms, molecules, that type of thing, we would expect a whole string of strange observations that would be caused by the interaction between this bending and expanding surface and the material content in contact with it. And then when we look at what's predicted by that, that's where David's experiments come in, because his experiments have given the exact results that would be predicted by artificially bending space in the presence of physical content, like in a haunted house.
You know, I have always believed that ghosts exist in a different dimension or exist at a different vibrational frequency, you know, and that whole concept of other realms and other worlds outside of the physical, you know, come down to us through philosophical traditions. I remember years ago joking around about many of the quantum physicists and saying, all right, in lectures, you know, if they went down to the metaphysical bookstore, they could learn all about these alternate realms because they've been talked about for centuries. But from your research, you know, and I'm going to throw this to either, David, you haven't spoken, so I'll give it to you first. Is that what you're finding? You know, is that what the research is telling you, is that there are these other realms and other layers of vibration and energy, a.k.a. just energy, that, you know, you were saying consciousness, I'm going to say these beings are living on that are imperceptible, quote unquote, to the naked eye?
Absolutely. I mean, they're not around us all the time. There's a misconception that, you know, this activity is occurring all the time. It's very transitory, and it is all revolving around a series of occurrences that set up a condition that allows this, I call it a conduit, to open. When this conduit opens, of course, it alters the entire environment locally around this aberration that's occurring. And one of the problems is that the conduit manifestation is viewed by general field investigators as haunting activity, in which case it isn't haunting activity or paranormal at all. It's actually all of the activities forming well within the realm of standard physics. Some of the observations we are making tend to be what we perceive as macro manifestations of quantum mechanics, such as paraproduction, wave-particle duality. These sort of things we are witnessing at a macro level, which is why quantum mechanics is fitting in so nicely with this research, because we're able to use concepts in quantum mechanics to help predict these outcomes, which is pretty fascinating. I'm surprised that more physicists are not seriously looking at this, because I believe that before they're able to come up with the grand theory of everything, this area is going to have to be thoroughly explored, because the missing links are within this manifestation that we're studying right now. The things that tie gravity to the other three sources of the universe are going to be answered by investigating this specific area of physics.
Want to add anything, Tom?
Yes, and so people can kind of get where the similarities between David's work and myself, where those similarities are, and some of the differences. David talks from time to time about this information. And again, when we talk about information, think about your computer and its printer, where the data that's stored on your hard drive is like, in a way, the kind of information that I'm talking about. And that the computer processes itself are the processes that occur, that are built into the universe, that results in the materialization of that information coming out of your printer. And once it's fully materialized, you can see it, you can touch it, it reflects light, it's affected by gravity, everything that, you know, would be in common with the properties of a physical object. And yet the source of the information is, practically speaking, indiscernible and invisible. So if you kind of look at it that way, it gives you the model. Now, with the printer, so to speak, with the way that the information emerges, materialized into physical reality, when it comes to a paranormal haunting, what David proposes is that...
And can I interrupt one quick second? When you're talking about a haunting, are we talking only active hauntings, or are we talking this phenomena occurs in residual hauntings as well? Because I'd like to separate the two if they need to be separated.
They do need to be separated, but they are part of the same mechanic.
Okay.
And I'll get to that when Tom finishes.
Okay.
Okay. To me, something as in terms of an active or residual haunting, the distinction to me is not made once that information is materialized. In other words, whether it's a residual or intelligent haunting or active haunting or something like that, the physical processes by which that information materializes into observable reality is the same in any event. Kind of in the same way, like, you could use a baseball bat to hit a home run or do all kinds of things with it, but it doesn't really matter who's holding the bat. We're studying the forensics of it itself. The point that I was trying to lead to is that the emergence of this information in the local space-time, where we can observe it in various different forms associated with hauntings. David talks about that emergent point being like what we call an Einstein-Rosen bridge. Colloquially speaking, you would say it's the mouth of a wormhole. The interesting thing about that is that if a wormhole opened in local space, it would bend and warp the space-time at the emergence point of its opening.
Absolutely.
And the model that I described does the exact same thing. It bends local space-time. And once that phenomena emerges, the environmental results that can be observed and measured at the site of such a space-time bending or expansion is absolutely identical in both his theory and in mine.
And we're not sure if it isn't a combination of the two creating it. My biggest argument for it being an Einstein-Rosen bridge or a wormhole is the data that we actually collect in that event horizon. One of the things that we know about a wormhole is it requires exotic matter to remain stable. Exotic matter is matter with a negative mass. When exotic matter comes into contact with our matter, it annihilates. And it annihilates at a Planck level. In other words, it annihilates at a subatomic level, a particulate level, like down to the quarks and the gluons and things. So we are observing bursts of gamma radiation in this event horizon, really high bursts, like 350 millirad per hour bursts of gamma radiation. And you don't find that normally in someone's living room. And it's very transitory. It's very transitory.
Depending on what people are doing in that living room.
Well, yeah, they would have to have some type of particle collider going on in there. But so what we're observing, we're also observing time fluctuations, where the actual speed in which time passes is altering. We're seeing gravity fluctuations along 3 different axes, meaning that gravity not just from the Earth below us is fluctuating, gravity on 3 different planes is fluctuating. We're finding that there are other things, temperature fluctuations, dramatic drops in barometric pressure, air pressure drops. We're finding elevated levels of static energy in the environment. We're finding that the ionization of the atmosphere increases dramatically, most likely from these particle annihilations. We are finding formations of cold plasma. Yes, Virginia, there really is such a thing as an orb, although it is very rare, and it's the direct result of this discharging energy. They are not visible to the eye, and they manifest in the ultraviolet spectrum. These are things that are all occurring in this relatively 2-meter area of activity. And one of the things that I wanted to touch upon was the differentials that are occurring between what is an intelligent haunt and what is a passive haunt, or what we call a residual haunt. An Einstein-Rosen bridge connects two places in space-time, and that's a vital thing to keep in mind here, because not only can it connect two places in space, it could connect two places in time just as well. And what I believe we are observing in a residual effect is a historical event as it's taking place. We're literally looking at, July 1863 and watching a battle take place as it's taking place. And it's because we are momentarily attached to at least visually observe through that holographic boundary this historical event taking place at another time in history. So the Einstein-Rosen bridge aspect of it would explain both aspects of the paranormal activity, both the intelligent haunting, in which a intelligent consciousness or an energy form is manipulating it in order to form a projection or to influence our environment for whatever reason, as well as seeing something that's like a static activity, such as what is called a residual haunt.
But is this something that they're trying to do? I'm just trying to understand what mechanism the ghost, for lack of a better word, would use to manifest into reality, or why would they want to manifest into reality, our reality?
Why they would want to is the $64,000 question. I mean, not being a psychiatrist, and if we assume that the consciousness survives after death, then certainly the quirkiness that we had in life is going to carry over to when we're dead. What their personal motivation is, I have no idea. Now, if we look at the anecdotal evidence that's been presented over the years, there seems to be an association with unfinished business, work undone, unsolved crime, that sort of thing.
They want to be on Ghost Hunters and want their 15 minutes of fame.
It's almost like it's a personal motivation type of thing for whatever. So, I mean, I couldn't, speculate really as to what the motivation would be behind it. But the mechanism behind it seems to be what I believe associated with our birth. I think when we are born, our consciousness comes and emerges into this environment, directly into the womb. I think when we die, the same mechanism carries us away. I think wherever we go is a reality based on pure energy, not energy and mass. And I think that's why the manipulation of the environment is so easily accomplished when these things occur, because I think it's energy manipulation. The interesting thing about the emergence of information, I'm doing a parallel study right now, trying to understand the mechanics of mediumship. And what we are finding is the same thing. We have emerging information, and a medium actually seems to be like a huge biological television set in which they are receiving this low-frequency carrier wave and actually detecting the information on it and either seeing it as a movie being played inside their head, or a visualization, or a knowing, or that sort of thing. I mean, each medium has a different experience as to how they assimilate the information. But as long as that information is present, they're getting information. And once that wave collapses, they stop getting information. So there seems to be a corollary between this emerging information and how mediums work.
One of the things you said, but I'm going to throw this at Tom, because it's one of the things you said, though, David, is that you think that they're pure energy, but from a more philosophical perspective, they talk about multiple levels of energy. Like from a spiritual place, they talk about the different energy bodies, the etheric body, the emotional body, the mental body. Could it be that what we're interacting with are kind of in a higher level of vibration than the physical world, but not necessarily the highest level of vibration out there?
Well, that's an interesting question. I just, before I answer that, I just wanted to toss out one thing real quick about what David was saying, so that people in the audience kind of understand. When David was talking about the mouth or the emergence of an Einstein-Rosen bridge, that this is a structure that has been well studied theoretically by mainstream physics, and they determined that if such a structure was to emerge, that there would be very, very specific kinds of measurements that could be taken at that mouth that would be associated directly with that physical structure. And what David's talking about with his experimental results are that he is measuring the precise kinds of observations and changes that are dictated and theorized by mainstream physics. So I wanted to point that out, that this is not kind of a something like or looks like or sounds like. You know, it actually is doing exactly what theorist says it will do. But to go on to what you were asking, Dr. Rita, for me, when it comes to energy, I have a little bit of a different viewpoint. Of course, when it comes to my model, about materializing information within the folds of space, I'm not limiting that to paranormal phenomena. What my model says is all of reality, everything, you know, from stars to spaceships to grains of sand, everything materializes with this exact same process. It's occurring everywhere in the universe at the same time. Now, if that's the case, and both the information and the mechanism by which that information materializes is coming from something that is superphysical, that is above the physical universe, as per, you know, David Bohm's implicate order and those types of things, then that superphysical realm does not comprise energy. This is where people this is one of the problems where people have been confused, I think, in their reasoning for decades, for generations, that they have been trying to assign physical attributes to a process that is in part not physical. So essentially, as soon as you exit the realm of the physical, you no longer have the dimensional parameters necessary to manifest energy. Like, for example, what I say when people use the term spirit energy, I say that that's a conflict in terms. It's like saying honest politician. Because what is spiritual is not physical. But energy is physical. So what I say is that all the energy, the observations that would be energetic, so to speak, that would comprise energy, are emerging and materializing from the process by which information materializes into physical reality. It is that process by which energy emerges and takes on certain characteristics, certain properties, certain frequencies, because remember, this is something that we have to keep in mind, is that a energy wave or a vibration of any sort has two components, fundamental components. It has frequency and it has amplitude. Now, frequency is time. How many beats per second that wave oscillates? That is a temporal measurement. Amplitude is physical. It's height, width, and depth. It's spatial. Now, space-time comprises all of those elements. Einstein said that the continuous spatial field is substantial. It is not a void like Newton tried to tell us. He said in that substantial field is defined by and characterized by four independent variables: height, width, depth, and time. So in order to have energy, you would have to have a wave. In order to have a wave, you have to have physical space to suspend it in. You have to have height, width, depth, and time. Otherwise, you can't have frequency and amplitude. If you exit the physical universe, in a sense, go superluminal, go beyond the point where space and time emerges as distinct dimensions, you can't have energy. Energy can't exist in that kind of an environment. One of the things I point out to people when they think about spirit energy, and they say, well, energy can't be created or destroyed, so when we die, our spirit is, lives on as energy. Well, if our spirit has some sort of a distinct characteristic that distinguishes our spirit from any other, there has to be that information, that unique information, that's stored somehow in that pattern of energy. And what I say is, think about in the future when our sun goes supernova and it burns up the Earth. That event is going to destroy all coherent patterns of energy in the Earth, in the vicinity of the Earth. We would very much have random high radiation particles flying around at near or at light speed with no coherent order to them. So if you believe your spirit lives on in a form of physical energy, then you also believe that our spirits are not eternal, because they will be destroyed when our sun goes supernova.
But that implies that they have to stay here around this planet versus they could go anywhere they want.
I understand, but the universe works within constraints. So where would they go? Would they go somewhere else? Where would that be? Not in this physical universe. We would have to find a conduit, by like what David says. We'd have to have some magical place in the other part of the universe where they all go.
We would have to have an adjacent universe that was based on pure energy and not energy and matter in order for that to work.
Ah, there you go, David, which means that even if they do sustain themselves in an energetic pattern, they're not being sustained and located locally here.
That's right. They can manifest locally, but they can't physically exist locally.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to
so
manifest.
They would have to leave our local space.
Yeah, they would have to manifest from the boundary. In other words, it would be a boundary effect.
Right. The point I'm trying to make is that this is another paradigm that most people labor under, which is confusing because it's inaccurate, and it leads to us having spent many great philosophical minds pounding their head against this theoretical wall over and over and coming up with nothing, because their fundamental premises from which they're beginning to reckon are false.
Yeah.
Would this mean, this is like the only thing that I think I understand sort of from physics, is that in order for one of these wormholes to manifest, there needs to be an observer? Or can they do that in and of themselves?
No, it has nothing to do with the observer. Wormholes form around us all the time. If you take, for example, some of the most famous physicists of our time, let's take Stephen Hawking as an example. Hawking believes that millions and millions of wormholes form around us every day, and we never notice them because they're forming at a Planck level. In other words, they're forming at a very tiny level. Interestingly, though, you can put a lot of information on a photon, and a photon is a subatomic particle. However, I believe we are seeing a manifestation of something significantly larger than a Planck level, and yet it's displaying very Planck-like characteristics. In other words, it's displaying quantum characteristics at a macro level. And I think that that's a vital key in all of this, is the fact that there seems to be a manifestation of quantum mechanics in the visual spectrum where we can literally observe it. And to me, that's a very huge discovery. Now, what it pans out to be exactly in the end, whether it's more like Tom's model or more like my model or a combination of the two models, the important aspect of all of this is that it exposes a very underlying fundamental operation of the universe and may place us physically in a multiverse of environmental situations where we are just but one bubble in a whole sheet of bubble wrap. So, it's a very fundamental theory and experiment series that we're working on right now, and not just for the impact that it has on understanding the paranormal, but the total impact that it has on understanding physics and quantum mechanics and tying the two neatly together. So, do we have ulterior motives for what we're doing? Absolutely. And it isn't necessarily to be the end-all in the paranormal field. It's necessarily to make a dramatic discovery in physics to tie the two areas together. It just happens to be that it's occurring within the field of paranormal study and paranormal manifestation.
You were talking about the information not being, at the photon level, but is there a possibility, and I'm just throwing this out there, that it's holographic in nature? So all of this data is encapsulated in this tiny bite of information.
Well, it's very possible, but see, there's a holographic effect that's occurring anyway. If we take the position that it is an Einstein-Rosen bridge, then an Einstein-Rosen bridge is in many ways similar to a black hole in some aspects, in that it does have a holographic boundary. It has an area that's much like a high-definition projection screen. And based on how that screen is excited, with what energy excites that screen, will determine what that screen displays. I think that that's the secret to visual stimulation. When we physically see something that's occurring, I think we're actually seeing a holographic representation of pure energy. Does the energy have intelligence behind it? It can, absolutely. So what I refer to when I talk about energy at a photonic level is that there are a lot of little things that happen around us every day that seem to defy explanation, that don't necessarily mean that you have a wormhole forming in your living room. It may mean that you have a very microscopic wormhole forming adjacent to where you are that's affecting your environment by emerging energy into it. Or you may have, I've had something where I saw something briefly out of the corner of my eye, and then it just, was gone. So it wasn't a full-fledged paranormal event. It was a significant occurrence that defied explanation. That could simply be a photonic burst of information that occurred and was gone that fast. Such events are very difficult to measure because they're extraordinarily transitory in nature, and yet they alter the environment in a way that's unexplainable.
Tom, any comments about the potentially maybe holographic nature of the information?
Yes, and essentially, here's where my source, so to speak, is very different, because I believe the source is superphysical. I don't believe that the entire chain of events, from beginning to end, from A to Z, can be expressed in purely physical terms. And keep in mind, energy is physical. Sometimes people hear physical and they say, well, gee, that's matter. No. Energy is physical also, just like the very fabric of space-time itself is physical. So I don't necessarily believe that the explanation of all things from A to Z always has a physical cause. And I'll give you an example. Let's talk a moment about remote viewing. And let's talk about what's involved with that and some of the experiments that have been conducted with this. And we know that the United States government and both the Soviet Union's government spent much time and effort and money in researching remote viewing. And although our government says that we no longer do those experiments, I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to prove that, perhaps they still are playing with it. But let's look at this, for example. And again, keep in mind the idea of information. Let's say a person on the East Coast is remote viewing a scene or a location or an event all the way over to the West Coast. Now, if they're able to see that accurately, that means that they are receiving all of the information from which that West Coast scene comprises, from which it is assembled. If they see a 1957 Chevy painted red, the geometry of that Chevrolet, the actual molecular structure of the paint, which is configured in a way to reflect red light, the red wavelength out of light waves, that very specific information is being transferred to the recipient, to the viewer. However, experiments that have been conducted in Faraday cages lead us to believe.
Well, we need to take a break. So, Tom, if you could kind of hold that thought till we come back.
I will.
I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to David Rountree and Thomas Fusco about ghosts and all those scientific things. Their website. Well, we'll come back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.